What up everybody, Ryan here, welcome to the channel. This video is going to be a conversation between myself and Dave Berke. Dave was an advisor on the film Top Gun Maverick. He's flown essentially every fighter jet known to man, no big deal. He's currently working with Echelon Front and Jocko doing leadership instruction. So he's got a lot of things to offer. He's got the flying side, he's got the personal life side, and the leadership side. So I definitely think you're going to get a lot out of this video. I know I got a lot out of the conversation, but before we get going, if you would, just dominate that like button for me, maybe even subscribe. Every time you like and subscribe, you create that sonic boom that ripples through the universe, or something like that. I'm glad you guys are here. Let's dive into this conversation with Dave Berke. Here we go. Dave, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, hey, I hit record already, so I figure I'll either trim it out or, some people like to hear the BSing, and I'm all about that. So if you're
Yeah,
cool.
I try to be the same on and off camera, so hopefully there's nothing you have to edit out.
Love it, man, for sure. Well, dude, welcome. I had a lot of people reach out to me and they were like, you got to interview Dave. Like the Top Gun mania hasn't ended, as you know. So
Crazy, man. It's still got steam going, which is pretty neat. I think that's good for all of us, man. I think it's going to inspire another generation of young kids like you and I probably were and say, I want to go do that. So
totally, dude, it's like the rising tide raises all boats, right? Like,
indeed. And I'm in a hotel. I'm traveling for work, so it's not the coolest background you're ever going to see. So apologies for that, but this is the best I can do.
all good, man. I think your actual background, to throw that in there, makes up for it, dude. You've flown like almost every fourth generation fighter, fifth gen. You've flown both of the fifth gens here in the U.S. Wow, like how was that? That's probably the top question I have here. Is like, what was it like flying all these different jets?
I mean, it was awesome. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's kind of maybe two parts to that answer. One is flying the jets is super cool, as you know, and I think, you flew Strike Eagles and Vipers, and it's just, I think we always love our first jet. You just got that special place in your heart, that Hornet, and for you, the Strike, like you're going to love that airplane. But when you get into another jet, it's fun, man. It's really cool to get dual qualled. It's really cool to get a second qual because most of us, at least in our generation, you get your MDS or your TMS, Air Force and Navy speak for your platform. And it's not that common to get to fly another jet. So if you get a second jet in your career, it's kind of cool and it's pretty wild. And so when I got my second jet, I was thinking, man, I just hit the lottery. And then when I got the third, I'm like, this is sort of crazy. And when I got the fourth one, it was like, I know I'm living a pretty blessed life. And I kind of know that I've lost all my friends because nobody likes me anymore because I've got to do all these cool things. But honestly, man, the coolest part of it is that it got me to fly with the other services. So my Top Gun time, I'm flying mostly with the Navy, which was awesome. Then I got the Air Force exchange to fly the Raptor, and I spent 3+ years, almost 4 years, with the Air Force between the TX course and then in a squadron. And I'm the Marine in an entire squadron of Air Force pilots. And then when I went to do the F-35, it was an Air Force wing, but it was a joint wing of Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force. So I got to see all the different services fly and got to see all the, the goods and bads of all of it. So it wasn't just the airplanes. I got to be with all the different kinds of people, which was really, really cool. That was really the best part of it for me is I have great relationships, great friendships, and dude, incredibly great respect. Not just for Marine Corps aviation, of course I'm biased to that, but for all the time I spent with the Navy and all the time I spent with the Air Force, even at Nellis. So right up the road from you, when I was at the 422, you're just down there with the Thunderbird. So I got to know that world really well, man. Just an amazing, amazing time.
That's rad, man. I want to step back for a second because I don't know if some of the viewers know, but so you work at Echelon Front right now. You work with Leif and Jocko.
Yeah.
And I was stalking you on your Echelon Front page, and I was laughing because of the gold polo. Can you tell people about the gold polo real quick?
Yeah, it's kind of a classic story of not doing something very simple that we teach, which is if you don't understand, you should ask a question. But the story goes, so I worked, obviously my career as a pilot, but ironically, probably the most influential year I had was not flying airplanes. I volunteered to be a forward air controller. Some of the Air Force terms you might heard the term JTAC. It's a pilot, so it's a little bit different. But in the end, I volunteered to go on the ground to control aircraft very randomly through a series of just fortunate or unfortunate events, depending on what you're looking for. I found myself in Ramadi in 2006 at the height of the insurgency, brutal, violent, worst place to be. Showed up in the exact same place, the exact same time as Jocko's task unit bruiser from SEAL Team 3, and essentially was co-located with Leif's platoon, one of Jocko's 2 platoons. And so my team, my Anglico team, as a forward air controller, and Jocko and Leif's team, we ended up working together really closely, built an amazing relationship. I was with them on a whole bunch of missions, and we got really tight. This is back in 2006. And, I go my way, they go their way. I hadn't talked to these guys in years. And Leif saw me doing an interview on 60 Minutes about the F-35 randomly when I first picked up that F-35 transition. Nice. And so we kind of rekindled our connection. And he's like, hey man, we think this company is going to grow. We would love you to join. And it was just the 2 of them at the time. And I'm like, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was on track to stick around for the Marine Corps. I'd selected for 06. I'd selected for 06 command, like really, really big decision. I'm like, hey, you know what? I really feel like I'm ready to do something else. He's like, cool, come to an event. He texts me the location, the place, and the time. And I'm like, cool, what do I wear? I've been in a uniform 23 years.
That's a dangerous question to ask.
Yeah. So he texts me a message that said, we'll be in like pants and gold shirts. And I'm like, I remember reading the text and I'm like, okay. And it was kind of a little bit of a red flag, but all I did was reply, Roger. I didn't want to ask any questions, and the new guy wanted to make a good first impression. I don't obviously have a gold shirt, so I went to the store and bought like a canary yellow, as the closest I could get, polo shirt. What had happened was when he typed in polo, it had auto corrected to gold. So instead of it saying polo shirt, it said gold shirt. So I show up and wearing like these blue pants and this bright yellow shirt. They're of course not in gold shirts. They're in just like black polos. And as soon as they walk in, Jocko's like, dude, what's with the gold shirt?
And what better a way to show one's wealth than by wearing a shirt made totally out of pure gold?
Yeah. Dude.
So I was super embarrassed. I was mortified. I spent the whole day in this super bright canary yellow polo, this kind of gold polo. And of course that got legs of the new guy doesn't even want to confirm, is it really possible Leif and Jocko would be gold shirts? But I bought myself a gold polo thinking that's what they're going to wear. And the rest is kind of history.
Dude, that's awesome. I thought it was hazing at first. And you've seen Happy Gilmore, right?
Absolutely. I see it. What's the 9th green at 9 or something like that?
Yeah. For those watching, if you haven't seen it, basically Happy Gilmore shows up to the PGA Tour and they're like, hey man, welcome to the tour. We're so glad that you're a part of this. Show up tonight, 9 p.m. on the 9th green, wear a suit, wear something nice.
Happy. Dress nice, huh? Oh, all right.
Almost 9 o'clock.
So he shows up and the sprinklers turn on at 9 and he gets soaked and he's like, all right. Like, I definitely thought it was hazing, man. Are you sure it wasn't autocorrect? Like,
well, I never thought on those terms, but I think what it boiled down to was that was 100% me, not them. And I wish I just said, am I seeing this correctly? But it all worked out. But my first impression with Jocko was not a good one.
Well, I love the fact that you seem to come across as, humble, credible, and approachable. And I would add in there, like, I don't know, like, you like to have fun. Like, there's like humor involved. And anytime I've seen like leaders that I respect or people that I want to be like, it's kind of like a little bit of that is like worked into it, right? Like having fun, joking around. So it sounds like that's the culture that you guys are in, and maybe the culture that you bring to other organizations when you meet with them.
Indeed. I'm glad you kind of mentioned that WIC mantra there. I've stolen humble, credible, and approachable from the weapons school and from the Air Force because I think it's awesome. I really like that. And I think the part that you're also adding to that, which is something I think is really important, is the authenticity. And I think the best part about getting to know Leif and Jocko differently from my time in Ramadi, that was a war zone, is a very unique environment. I was felt very much out of my comfort zone. These are Navy SEALs. I'm a pilot. So I didn't get to know them like this there. I got to know them in other ways. So me joining Echelon Front exposed me to a whole different side of them that I hadn't seen, the not in the combat zone side. And the best part about that is that it is genuinely authentic. They are as authentic a human beings as I've ever met. There's no behind the screen facade. There's no how I am on camera versus off camera. They are who they are. And I think it's undeniably comes through about them that they are authentic, normal, regular people that have done some incredible things, but they're just regular people. They like to have fun, like to have a good time. They are genuinely humble. They're certainly credible, and they're genuinely approachable. And I've learned a lot from that authenticity is really important. Of course, we carry that with our clients, but it's a great thing for me to be with people that I respect. And then when I get to know them, I realize this is who they are. And I think it's a core of who we are at Echelon Front is what you see is what you get. There's no behind the scenes behavior that is going on that we kind of get it all squared away for the camera. You are getting the authentic person, no matter what the environment is. And I've seen them in all sorts of different environments, and it's great because it is genuinely authentic. And I'm glad that comes through because it's certainly important to us.
Well, I love that you said that. I think that's why it works, man, is like, that's why you guys are this like force to be reckoned with. You know, it's not just a flash in the pan, like, cool, you know, one hit wonder. It's like, this is a brand, you know, the whole brands that are also attached to you guys are lasting because people trust you. They're like, oh, cool. We know these guys are going to, you know, be honest about what they say. You know, it's Origin, right? That one of Jocko's companies, made in the USA. And like, I don't think people have ever, they're like, yeah, like we know that. I mean, for a lot of reasons, like the way that you guys explain it and talk about it, but there's no like, well, and I think that's an intangible that not a lot of people give enough weight to. Is like, you know, this is our life. It's not just, you know, business. So
it's a great point, man. I'm glad that you see that. And I think the recognition for anybody out there listening that is a critical factor to long-term success is you have to be an authentic person. That's true in the military. It's true out of the military. I think that's kind of human nature 101. So yeah, I appreciate those comments, man. They're spot on.
Yeah, for sure, man. I like to nerd out on leadership stuff too. I got to chat with Simon Sinek a little bit. Are you familiar with any of his stuff?
A little bit. I don't, not super well, but I certainly know who he is.
Okay. He talks about like long game versus short game. So like if you're playing the short game, you know, you're in it for the quick profits, you know, the easy success, the quick, you know, your 15 minutes of fame or whatever. But if you're playing the long game, you're building that lasting brand and company. So when you were talking about, you know, your guys' philosophy, I was like, oh man, this is the long game versus short game. You guys are playing the long game. So
we use the exact same language. We are playing the long game, the strategic game. That's absolutely right.
Love it. All right, I'm going to transition for a second, man. Dude, a lot of the questions on Instagram were like, what, you know, the Top Gun, they're all Top Gun oriented, which I love. So what role did you play? And this is from Amanda. She's got a follow-on question to this as well. But what role did you play in Top Gun? Were you an advisor for Top Gun Maverick?
So unofficially, and I can say this now because I'm retired, but yes, unofficially. So I'm at the point now where I guess I'm probably pretty safe saying it. And to be very clear, I played a very, very minimal role. In fact, you know, a lot of the guys that I knew, the bros at Top Gun, that played significant roles, their names are on the screen, they played much more critical roles. But
copy, top advisor to Top Gun. Got it. No,
right. It's kind of cool, I guess.
That's super cool, man. Was it, now obviously like the technical side, I'm sure they would come to you with questions about that, but from the character development side, I saw some cool stuff with like some of the personalities. Let's say like Hangman, kind of like a little more edgy, a little more in your face. Like I definitely knew guys like that in the fighter squadron. And then guys like Rooster, where they're maybe not, you know, they're a little more emotional, where they're just like more relatable. They care more about people, not winning quite as much. Were you taking things from the real, you know, your fighter squadron experience and sharing that?
I didn't go to that. No, I did not go to that level. It wasn't the level of detail where I could say that I had any influence on individual characters. All that for me is very much after the fact, like you, is seeing it and seeing those characters. There was definitely a sense as they started to build this, that the competitive nature, or I guess a better way to put it is, inside the original movie, there was this competition between characters. They knew that was something they wanted to continue to model. It was an effective storytelling, you know, medium, which was these two characters were competitors, you know, the Maverick and Iceman. And so they knew that there had to be that sense of that. I never had any influence over any individual character development. It was much more about, would this happen the way that it did? Would they say it like that? Would they kind of generally interact like that? So they went much more refined after that. Mine was like way, way, way high level. But I will say this, despite the fact that probably each of the individual characters in the movie were a little exaggerated, like you talked about, I think his name was Hangman. It's kind of, he's the ego guy. It's probably a little bit over the top, but not like crazy. I knew guys that had big egos, and I probably throughout my career could look back and have people who say that I had a big ego. So yes, they exaggerated it a little bit, I think, because you got to tell a story in 2 hours. And so they magnified a bit, but they touched on real personalities inside all those characters that I could relate to just the way you did too. So I really thought, even though they're a little bit magnified, they did a good job identifying that there are different types of people out there doing the same thing, and they absolutely interact differently. And you got to deal with those personalities, man. It's a real thing.
Absolutely, man. Which character reminds you the most of yourself in the film?
Oh man. I don't know if I could answer that. I to be quite frank, I think probably a blend of all of them. The character, I think I got it right. I think his name is Bob. He's believe it or not, he's like a backseater.
Yeah.
I liked him because he was super understated and very subtle. He ended up being, really capable and talented, but he was good about like not saying much. And then when he said something, it was like a really good one-liner to make the other person kind of feel bad. And so I really resonated with that character. Of the people I appreciate the most are the ones that say the least, that do the most. And I looked at that guy, I'm like, that was a cool character. I really liked that they developed that character, and he got a couple of good shots in on the loudmouths. But for the rest of the time, he just head down doing some good work, which was really cool.
Solid, man. Oh, I like that observation. So flying the F-15E, I got to be in a squadron with half Wizzos, with weapons systems officers. And I felt like they were this cool counterbalance to like the type A ego that, I probably had at times, more than I'd like to admit probably, but they were like that grounding force in the squadron of like, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room. Like you just said, sometimes the biggest contributor sits back, takes in the information, and then acts from a place of better understanding. Did you see that in the Navy or in the Marines as well?
Well, where I saw it was at Top Gun, because I was throughout my career flew single seat aircraft. So my Hornet experience was all single seat. And then I go up to Top Gun, and I had some dual, I got qualified in the 2-seat platform to work with Wizzos, to be able to teach and train both Tomcat crews, and then Super Hornet crews started coming through during my time. So my experience was learning and building relationships with former Tomcat and now Super Hornet backseaters that were from the Navy. I'm in the Marine Corps, and built that same experience that you had. And in fact, when I was my last job at Top Gun was the training officer. It's like the senior job. It's like the coolest job, different term for Navy and Air Force. So training officer in the Air Force is not that big of a deal. It's the weapons officer is the big deal. But in the Marine Corps and the Navy, the training officer is like the coolest job. And the other job that we had was called the standardization officer. The standardization officer is kind of your partner in crime, your counterpart. He was a former Tomcat pilot Wizzo, or Tomcat Rio turned Super Hornet Wizzo, who is exactly that, just quiet, understated, and just one of the smartest, most influential, one of my closest friends. And I look back on my relationship with him, and he was just an amazing guy, and nothing like this big, brash, arrogant loudmouth. And yet one of the most effective and capable instructors you could ever imagine. And on paper, like very different from your stereotypical single seat fighter pilot that I, was and grew up as. So it was a really cool experience to meet that community. I'm sure you saw that in the strike, saw a lot of that when I was in the 422, with Strike Eagles there and whatnot. So just a really cool thing.
Man, that's awesome. And I think that could speak to a lot of people in whatever their profession is, whatever job they're, whatever interview they're going for or whatever. You don't have to be that like, hey, like look at me type person, and that might actually hurt you, right? I remember applying for the Thunderbirds, and it was pretty fun process. It was like a week-long interview, and I remember being there, and there was like these guys and gals that were like kind of running to the front every time, trying to get the most face time with the boss, and I was just like, well, I'm probably not going to get this because I just don't feel like I would feel like weird doing that, and I didn't know why. And I remember one of the pilots on the team pulled me aside later, and he's like, dude, and I told him, I'm like, dude, I'm kind of like being a little quieter during this interview process. I don't know, how it's going. He said what you just said. He's like, sometimes, I've seen a couple rounds come through here, and it's these people that are loud that no one wants around. Dude, that's really, really cool. Okay, Amanda's follow-up question was, in the scene in Top Gun when they fly under the bridge, could they really make that happen, or is it only going to happen with CGI? And what's the realities of flying a jet in a situation like that?
I think you're the right guy to answer, Thunderbird pilots. Your average Dave Berke is not flying that jet through that bridge. You guys could probably pull that off, though. Other than that, I think they're relying on CGI.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Maybe if you had like, like a 3-mile stretch of property and you set it up to where, okay,
You
this
knew
is,
it was coming, yeah.
you knew it was coming, you get into knife edge, you like precisely time it out to where you're like, okay, I'm going to lose 100 feet throughout this like knife edge pass. But yeah, doing that by the seat of your pants, man, I don't know. That's only Maverick.
It looked super cool though. So
yeah, 100%, 100%. All right. Easy Rhino asked, as a Marine pilot, how'd you get to fly the F-22?
Like most things in my life, just good luck and good timing, good circumstance. Luck has played such a huge part of my career. So I was a Hornet pilot, went to Top Gun, was a Top Gun instructor, left, went to that FAC tour, and then went back to the Marine Corps fleet and picked up what we call a department head job, kind of a key leader, like I was number 2, number 3 in the squadron for a couple of years. And I happened to do that relatively early in my career. And during that time, the Marine Corps was getting really serious about 5th generation airplanes, the F-35. But there was some concern about how we were going to figure out how to release that platform into the Navy and the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps had never done that. So they decided that it would be really helpful to establish an exchange with the Air Force, because the Air Force had gone through a lot of growing pains with the Raptor. And what they really wanted was kind of like a spy to go to the Air Force and go, hey, teach us all the things you learned about transitioning from 4th to 5th gen, so the Marine Corps doesn't have to repeat a lot of those same mistakes. And mistakes might be the right word, but just learn from them so we don't have to go through the same growing pains. So this billet hit where the Marine Corps was going to send a pilot to fly Raptors for 3 years. It turns out that when the Air Force and the Navy / Marine Corps got together, what the Air Force wanted was a weapons school instructor. And what the Marine Corps wanted was someone who was a post-department head that wasn't going to derail their career during those 3 critical years where most people are getting those key jobs that you have to keep getting promoted. I had both. A lot of people wanted that job. I was very lucky to have had some of those qualifications that all the services wanted, and the timing worked out that I was available to do that. And I applied, and I happened to be the person that they picked, and with the intent of spending all that time with the Air Force so I could then help the Marine Corps transition to 5th generation airplanes and to learn all those lessons the Air Force had just gone through with the F-22. So I found myself flying Raptors. I got through the TX course, the transition course at Tyndall, and then was stationed at Nellis for 3.5 years and flew the F-22 at Nellis. Man, it was, Nellis. Nellis is a great place to fly airplanes.
Dude, okay, so this is the point in your career when people started hating you and being jealous.
Yeah, people are like, and I got the Top Gun experience. I had the F-16 experience. So I flew Vipers at Top Gun for 3 years. As soon as I got there, it was the first time in, I don't know how long it'd been, they were sending the first class down to get the F-16 qual. So again, perfect timing. So people already knew that I'd been dual qual, and like, all right, that's fine. When I got the Raptor, people definitely were alienating me. By the time the F-35 came around, like no more friends in the Marine Corps.
Dude, it's lonely at the top, man. That's awesome. Okay, this comes from Chili, and Chili, shout out to him. He sent me the original message that was like, you got to chat with Dave. He said, and he's a current F-18 instructor pilot. So he's got kind of a wonky question. So we'll give him one wonky question, which is cool though. I think everybody can kind of learn something from it. He said, for the Navy, would you recommend each squadron become more specialized in the air wing? Or, so for example, the single seat F-18E should focus on air-to-air, while two-seaters focus on air-to-ground and maritime strike in conjunction with the F-35's new mission, or maintain the jack-of-all-trades strategy?
Good question. I literally just read, somebody had written an article advocating a Navy pilot. I think it was actually a Navy Wizzo had just written an article that I read advocating for exactly that. And I think the logic behind it was there's really not enough time to train every squadron in every mission set to be proficient in all of them. And you know this from your Strike Eagle experience, being dual role platform, air to air and air to ground, there's a lot going on. And to maintain proficiency is not easy. And now the carrier air wing, on the Navy side has all these additional roles and responsibilities, fleet defense, defending the carrier, a whole bunch of other things that are like not airplane centric, but they're carrier centric, which are challenges. And there's a lot of logic behind, okay, I've got 4 squadrons. I'm going to take my 2E squadrons. They're going to be air-to-air proficient. I'm going to make my F squadron really air-to-ground proficient. And then my F-35 squadron obviously will do some other unique F-35 things. And they can't do some of those 4th gen missions, like they can't be a tanker, things like that. So I understand that logic. And I don't know if I share the same opinion as other people. I have resented to some small degree this idea, and I know when I'm saying this, having flown some other platforms, and people are going to flatly disagree. So bring other people on to get their opinion. There's this logic of, hey, jack of all trades, master of none, which means like you can do a whole bunch of things, but you can't do them well. I know it's hard to do, but I saw some other people in multi-mission platforms. Strike Eagle is a great example. Hornet, especially, the Hornets that I saw within the Super Hornet and the Legacy Hornet, great example. I saw pilots and crews that got really proficient in all of them. Like pilots that were incredibly good at air to air and incredibly good at air to ground, knew every single thing about the airplane. Now, I'm not saying that that's easy, but I don't think the logic of jack of all trades, master of none should be the reason why we specialize. If money, budgets, time, other drivers for that, then I don't disagree with that logic, but I don't subscribe to the idea that you've got too many things to do, you can't be good at any of them. I saw Hornet pilots be as good at air to air as any Eagle, Raptor, Viper pilot. And that's true for Viper pilots, Eagle pilots, Raptor pilots, Hornet. So I have seen dual, multi-role platform aircraft, their air crews be as good as everybody else in those things. So I know it can be done. Now it's really hard. Like it's hard. So there's some real logic behind it, but not because it can't be done from a capability standpoint. And you probably have too, man. I have been on the giving and receiving end of I've won and lost in every platform. You know what I mean? I've looked over my shoulder and seen every one of the planes I've flown beating me and vice versa. So I know the capability is out there. Time, proficiency, those are hard things to account for. So I understand the logic, but it can be done. We've got our air crew, when given the right time and capability, they have amazing capacity to be really, really good at everything. So that's my take on sort of the multi-role platform and why I think you can be good at all of them. But there are some reasons that keep you from doing that might be worthy of consideration.
Nice. And do you take that same kind of mindset of it's possible when you're coaching leaders in the corporate world, when they're like, hey, should I be focused on these 50 departments or should I focus on this one? Like, what's that like? And is it kind of the same?
It's such a cool question because one of the things that I've benefited from in working at Echelon Front is my military experience translates very well. There's a version of everything we did in an airplane that applies to the private sector, not just to business, but your personal lives as well. Mm-hmm. And I think the answer to that question is, the short answer is absolutely. And the longer answer, I think, when you're thinking of being responsible or being a leader of all these different teams or different departments, all of those departments can be equally as good. But it's not going to be by you getting down there and micromanaging them.
A more micro form of management. Jim, what is that called?
Microregiment.
Boom. Yes.
And making sure what it's going to be is the exact opposite, which was teaching, training, resourcing, empowering, and letting them develop themselves to get to a level of proficiency. But you as a leader, even if you're at the very, very top of an organization and have a whole bunch of teams and departments underneath you in the org chart, they can all be equally as good. And the way you do that is by letting them and growing them and developing them and resourcing them in a way that allows them on their own to become as effective as they can be.
Hello, this is Michael Scott, Regional Manager.
Michael, I like the sound of your voice. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy $1 million worth of paper products today.
So I know it works. But again, that's hard. That's a challenge. And that's one of the great leadership challenges in the private sector. But I know it can be done, and I've seen it in every capacity. And so I know it's a possibility.
I love it, man. I love the open-mindedness of like, it's not just black or white. There's a gray area here where we got to make some decisions that are going to be hard, right? It's going to be different for each pilot. It's going to be different for each, C-suite executive. And I think that's cool.
100%.
Cool. All right. Rich from Canada. Rich has asked me this since like a couple weeks ago when I was requesting questions, and he's asked me like 2 or 3 times, man. He's excited. Have you ever had a dogfight with the Saab JAS-39 or the Eurofighter?
Not the Gripen, Eurofighters and Rafales, yes.
Okay, so nothing with the Gripen.
For whatever reason, I never crossed paths with a Gripen. I was lucky enough to fight some Eurofighters on a few occasions. And then very early on, I think on the very first Rafale carrier deployment, not only did some 1v1s with them, but actually flew out to their carrier and spent some time on the De Gaulle and its maiden deployment there. So some really cool experience with the French aircraft as well.
Awesome, man. Nice. Okay, a DT asks, does having life on the line stand out as the single most important factor to affect the effectiveness of leadership in military versus the corporate world?
Say that last part again.
Yeah, so having life on the line, does it stand out as the single most important factor to affect the difference in leadership in the military versus corporate world?
I thought that's what you said, and I want to make sure I heard it. My answer to that is that there is no difference between leadership in the military and the private sector.
Nice.
It's exactly the same. Now, what is unique is sometimes the private sector life is not on the line. There are certain jobs where that's not the case. There are many jobs, especially if you're thinking about law enforcement, healthcare, a whole bunch of things where life actually is on the line, no different from the military. And even if you're in a private sector situation where lives are not technically on the line, certainly like in combat, livelihoods are. I mean, how you provide for your family, how companies provide for their people. So there is sometimes in the military, there's a larger magnification of that risk. Combat is unique. Being in firefights on the ground, bullets going past, those are unique experiences. I can recall them in great detail and know that that level of risk certainly was magnified. But in the end, the leadership behaviors and how you lead military, private sector, it's exactly the same. And one of the things we try to do at Echelon Front is dispel the myth that somehow military leadership is different. The attributes that make you successful in the military are the exact same that make you successful in the private sector. And the attributes that let you fail in the private sector are the same attributes that will force you to fail in the military too. And you've worked for them as well. Leaders who are not humble, not credible, and not approachable usually don't succeed and usually don't have very good teams. And that's true. I don't care where you are. So I don't really draw a distinction between military and civilian. Private sector leadership is the same. But to that point, there are a couple of times where the environment is magnified, and that's a true statement. And it really just means you have to reinforce the reality that the leadership behaviors, you have to apply them even more in those situations. But it's the exact same thing.
Love it. And I would just say to Didi, just be weary of any leaders that make you show up in yellow polo shirts or like purple tank tops or whatever they.
That's a good point.
Watch out for the hazing. No, I'm just kidding. All right. This is a question from me. Is there a common trait that you saw, specifically, let's just say at Top Gun, of the folks that would succeed and the folks that maybe they would pass, maybe they would complete the program, or they wouldn't and they would fail?
Yeah.
Any common traits?
Yeah, I think that is in reflection, looking back and thinking about the ones that I saw, and I got to see a whole range, not just as a student, but of course as an instructor. Humility is unquestionably the attribute that stands out the most. Now, it's important, I think, for me to explain that humility doesn't always reveal itself in the same way. You're talking about that character Hangman, that he's the arrogant, loud guy. When your ego gets out of control, sometimes you become that person, but your ego can reveal itself in a bunch of different ways. You can be super quiet and your ego could still be raging inside. And I think what makes the thing that makes the ego piece of it the same across all the different behaviors, whether you're loud or quiet or arrogant, overtly or internally, is people whose egos get out of control, who aren't humble, they don't listen. They don't want to hear what you have to say. So they may be talking down to you and shutting you down, or they may just be, stone-faced listening or hearing you, but they're not actually listening to what you're saying. And when you stop listening, you stop learning, you don't change, you don't evolve, you don't get better. And that is the recipe for failure. And so the students at Top Gun, 9 times out of 10 that didn't graduate or weren't successful, it's because their egos wouldn't let them listen. They wouldn't change, wouldn't get better. It wasn't because they weren't capable or didn't have the right skill set. Once in a blue moon, we had people come that were humble, but just didn't have the skills, but that's exceedingly rare. The most common recipe for failure was being unwilling to listen and learn and get better. And that's all ego.
This is so important, I should run to answer it.
The more humility the students and the instructors had, the more likely they were to succeed. It's that simple.
Nice. So follow on to that then is like, okay, you walk into this new client, I guess, C-suite, and he or she's like, here's the issue, here's what's going on. I got this going on, this is the problem right here. And they're just like talking at you. How do you deal with that? What's your your first 10 minutes with that person? Maybe just summarize it in like a few sentences. What would you do?
I'm going to listen to them. That's probably all I'm going to do. And, I think I'm pretty lucky, certainly Echelon Front, is when we get brought in to work with companies, most of the time they've read the book, they really have thought about the principles and concepts and the mindsets, and it really resonates with them. So it's really not that common for me to get called to a client. And I'm lucky, I work with countless clients and have been for the last 6 years. It's actually pretty uncommon for a leader to come in and be pointing the finger or placing blame or saying what the problem is. That said, it still can happen sometimes. Ego is a really, really hard thing to manage. Mm-hmm. And what I'll see is, whether it's with a client or anywhere in my life, true in the military too, when someone's ego is flaring up and they're frustrated and they're getting emotional and they've got a lot to say, the best thing you can do is subordinate your ego and just listen to them. The last thing I want to do is kind of push back or resist and then create some of that conflict. And we say it all the time. In order to be a conflict, you got to have two participants. So if I see that ego from somebody else starting to flare up and they're showing some of those indicators of that emotion starting to rise, I'm going to try to go the opposite direction, because I don't want to create that conflict. And what I want them to see from me is me listening to them. And oftentimes, if someone who's going through that challenging emotional time sees the other person's listening, their temperature lowers, their ego kind of starts to subside. They're more willing to listen. And then you find an opportunity to talk, and you can be a lot more effective. But if you clash and push back and try to cut them off or stop them or challenge them, it tends to escalate things even worse. So I think listening is a pretty overlooked leadership trait, probably the most important leadership trait, in terms of actual behaviors, is to listen. And it's a really effective thing to do. So you see somebody getting flared up, just listen to them. Nice, man.
I love that. And I've seen some podcasts with Jocko. He talks about de-escalation, where he's like, if you're in a situation someone's getting aggressive with you, the worst thing you can do is like show them that you'll get aggressive with them too.
What do you want me to do? You just want me to hit you? Come on, do me this one favor. Why? Why? I don't know why. I don't know.
If you're not looking for a fight, and hopefully you're not, unless you're in combat or something like that. But the way that he said, I think a lot of people expected him to say, okay, here's how you meet the threat head on. And it's he's like, no, dude, that's not the point. The point is de-escalation. That's where you're going to get the best results, right? No one's going to get hurt. You can go home to your wife and kids. And so you're kind of talking about de-escalation, I feel like.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, because when Jocko talks about that idea, a lot of times he's talking about physical conflict, like fights. Mm-hmm. And people ask questions, how, getting in fights out in town and things like that. And if you look at Jocko, and almost everybody does, they're like, that guy's never going to lose a fight. And he probably isn't. He's physically capable of sort of handling almost anybody. And he's the guy saying, listen, don't get into a fight. His advice is run. And it has this sense of almost this very unsatisfying answer, because you're looking at this guy who's the ultimate Navy SEAL saying run. And then he explains things like, let's walk through all the potential scenarios if you decide to engage in this conflict. And they're all bad. They're all bad. And what he's revealing is, even in someone in his position who physically could probably handle himself more than almost anybody else, is telling you, listen, these are bad outcomes. They're bad outcomes in physical conflict. They're bad outcomes in all conflict. And so what you really want to do as often as you can is de-escalate and avoid that conflict. It gives you the best chance to be influential over time. But if you get pulled into that fight, what's going to end up happening is probably going to be a bad thing. So it's really good advice from someone who, above most other people, actually could manage their way through. And it's more compelling because he's the one saying, don't do it. Don't get into that fighting match. Don't get into that conflict. Don't get into that argument. De-escalate, go around it, go away from it. And it's really good advice, not just in physical conflict, but sort of throughout life. And we don't do that sometimes very well. And it's a good thing to learn to do.
True. So you said Jocko wouldn't lose in a fight, but you'd beat him in a dogfight, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably the only place I'm going to beat him, if I could ever manage to get him in an airplane.
All right, that's
where else I think I'm at a disadvantage.
That's fair. Okay, Jonathan, who's a GA buff, he asked, how hard was it to get your type rating in the F-35B? So you were the first one to get qualified in the F-35B, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you, he's talking about it in GA terms as a type rating, but
Yep. I'm tracking. Yeah. In the Navy, the Marine Corps, we call it NATOPS qualified. What do we call it in the Air Force? When you get, it wasn't NATOPS because that's whatever your check ride is. When you
we
get,
just call it mission qual, I think.
yeah. I think that's right. So I used to have like all the Rolodexes of all the terms correctly. I'm losing a couple of them, but I was always good at translating, Air Force to Marine Corps, like MDS, TMS, that kind of stuff. So I usually speak the language. I'm drawing a blank. I hear what you're saying. To be honest, by the time I was in the F-35, it was pretty easy for a couple of different reasons. One, I was an experienced pilot, and the initial qual is really just like, do you know the airplane? Can you know the mission systems pretty well? But the Raptor and the F-35 are really similar. So I felt much more comfortable in the F-35 transitioning from the Raptor than I did from Hornet/Viper to the Raptor. That was a hard transition for me. And if I misspoke, let me be more clear. Raptor to F-35 was a lot easier than Hornet to Raptor. 4th to 5th gen, when I was getting my qualification in the F-22, man, it was hard. And it was hard because I had thousands of hours of old 4th generation habits. I was exclusively Navy, Marine Corps, super comfortable. Now I'm in the Air Force. I'm the only Marine. I'm feeling a ton of stress. I'm surrounded by guys 10 years younger than me. I'm sort of nervous and anxious, wanting to give a good impression. I feel like the entire weight of the Marine Corps fighter aviation is on my shoulders. And this airplane is so different. So that qualification, getting mission qualified in the Raptor was really, it was a gut check for me. By the time I got to the F-35, I was much more comfortable, and those airplanes are so similar, built by the same builder and lots in common. So it wasn't nearly as tough for me as the previous one.
Awesome. Right on. Okay. So this gets asked to me probably every day, and and people ask you as well. What advice would you give to someone who wants to become a Marine, Navy, or Air Force pilot? What would you say?
Dude, I think you've answered it for them when you started off, like one of the first comments, when you hit that WIC mantra of humble, credible, and approachable. I think those are like cool life rules. It's not just how to be a good weapons instructor. It's a really cool life rule. You should be really good at your job. Now, if your goal is to be a Marine Corps or some sort of aviator, there's a path that there's a series of things you got to do. You got to get a college degree. Sometimes it has to be in a certain type of field. Then you got to go to OCS or depending on what there's all these things you got to do. And there's different paths. You could do the academy, you can do PLC, you can do ROTC, but there's a path out there. And so if you're trying to get to some end goal, all it is a series of steps. And you can kind of think of it in somewhat practical terms, like this is your job between step 1 and step 2. You got to do these things, and you should be really good at those things. You're going to have to be good in school. You're going to have to be good in physical fitness. You're going to have to be good in a bunch of different things. So being credible, which is kind of that middle piece, is really like saying, know what you're supposed to do and do it well. You should be really good at those things. And the path there is, you could Google the path. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not a secret. It's not hidden. It's actually surprisingly straightforward. You could Google how to become a pilot, and it'll tell you the academy is this, ROTC is this, OCS is this, and it's sort of straightforward. And the way you get through it is knowing what that is. And that humility piece, which is, I'm glad it's first, it should be first, is you have to be humble for yourself and humble for the people around you, because you're going to need some help along the way. Somewhere in that step from here to the cockpit of a fighter, you're going to need some help. And if you're humble, people are going to be much more willing and wanting to help you than if you're not humble. And then the last piece, they talk about being approachable. I think the point of that and the advice that you gave, which is a reflection of an Air Force mantra, is what they're saying is you could be really good in the jet. You could be real credible. You could be super humble, but people also want to interact with you. And I would attribute that to, you should build good relationships all along the way. Build good relationships, build good friendships. Don't underestimate people. Don't pass judgment on people. Learn and listen to those people. And because you're never going to know who's going to be that person you're going to be partnered up with, who you're going to need help from. So that humble, credible, approachable mantra isn't just about being a fighter pilot in the weapons school. It's good life advice, and it'll help you in kind of everything you do. And if you got a lot of people around you that you have good relationships with, you're really good at your job, and you're a humble person, you are probably going to be successful in whatever you do.
I love that. The thing I'll add on is I think a lot of young people think that they have to, day one, step into an F-35B and do a short field takeoff and landing. Like that, you know what I mean? There's like this intimidation around being a fighter pilot or a cargo pilot, tanker pilot, whatever, of you gotta be ready to go on day one. And it's that building block approach of what you just said, establishing those first and letting the process kind of happen, not psyching yourself out before you even get started.
I think that's super well said. It is a process. If you look from the beginning to the end, it seems like a mountain so tall you could never climb it. But if you break it down to those parts, you're like, oh, I can do this to this and this to this. And then it ends up being so much more practical. And I remember that experience in my life where I'm watching the movie Top Gun at 13. I'm like, I want to fly F-14s on carriers. And then you kind of coalesce around the idea and you get serious about it. And at some point you're like, nobody can do this. This is not possible. This is like an impossible thing. And then some point somebody showed me like, no, dude, this is totally doable. People do this all the time. And you just start at step one, go to step two, go to step 2 to 3. And if you break it down and recognize that it is a process, you don't have to have all the answers. Again, good life advice, no matter what you're doing. When you get to the cockpit of a fighter and you look back, you'll go, you know, and I know, and I hope this comes across the right way. You'll go, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And the reason is that you're just a normal person doing normal things, step along the way. And then you find yourself doing these remarkable things. But if you go from here and think, I got to get straight to here, it seems insurmountable. And so many people don't try to do it because it looks like it can't be done. And it absolutely can. And I guarantee you, I speak for you. You and I are just regular, normal people. What we did was wonderful and remarkable, but there's nothing unique about us other than doing what you just said. And I love that you said that this is a process. Anybody can follow that process. Anybody.
Said, man, that's awesome. Okay. I kind of am like, I guess a little bit like obsessed with what it means to win, like winning, you know, like maybe I'm a competitive type person and I know you're big on winning. You're big on defining winning and helping people win in their life or in their business, in their entrepreneurial pursuit or whatever. But how do you teach someone how to win without winning at all costs?
So again, a really cool question. Winning at all costs is such like a cool mantra. It's like a cool, like almost like a catchphrase. And it's you got to be really careful with that. You got to be really careful with that. And I'm not trying to diminish the never quit, never say die, that attitude that you're going to push as hard as you can. But winning at all costs is something that can kind of get you in trouble. And so when we talk about winning, and as you might guess, I like to win. I'm sure you do too. If you were to ask Jocko if he likes winning, he'd probably give you an emphatic yes.
Say it again.
You're a man, son. You gotta be kidding me.
But it's so important to think about what winning is. And listen, how you define that and how you articulate that and how you internalize that is different throughout life. I think it's something like when you're married and older, it's super easy to recognize that winning for me is my family is successful. You know, my kids grow up in a home where they can flourish. My wife has the things, you know, it's very easy to think about that winning is not about me at all. And in fact, I'm willing to endure a lot more pain and hardship myself if I know that what winning is that the people around me are successful, because their success becomes my success. So that's what winning is for me. And if you think about business, if you've got a team, winning is your team wins, because if your team wins, you're going to win. What you have to be careful is that winning, and it's very hard to say this because I grew up as a single seat fighter pilot, winning is not about you in most cases. And when you make that idea of what is winning like for me, and you internalize it about yourself, you run the risk of alienating yourself from the people around you, which means in the end, you're going to lose because you're not going to have the people around you that care about you. They're not going to have the people around you that want to help you. So the cool thing about the military is no matter what you're doing, even in this sort of individual sport of flight school, you are still part of a team. And there really aren't that many jobs out there or that many environments where you're not going to be part of a team. It's very, very rare that you are sort of by yourself in anything. And even in flight school, listen, it's an individual competition. You're competing against your peers, but you are part of a team. And when you recognize that if you are the one that contributes to the team being successful, and you become associated with, you are the reason or one of the reasons why the team succeeds, you individually will be successful. And the minute people get a sense that you're in it so Dave Berke can win at the expense of the people around you, you're going to make it really, really hard for you to succeed individually. And dude, make no mistake, I wanted to win. I knew what I wanted, what plane, what squad. I knew all those things. But the path there isn't to focus on you winning. The path is to focus on the people around you winning. And the byproduct of that is almost always you're going to be successful. And the exact opposite is true too. So pay attention to defining what winning looks like. And as often as you can, externalize that, make that about other people, the people around you, and you will win in return.
Wow, that's awesome, man. How do you personally thread that sweet spot of humble, credible, approachable into your personal life, your professional life? Like, what are you doing to thread that needle?
Yeah, and listen, man, you've alluded to it a couple of times, I think really well, is life is a balance. I mean, life is a balance. And even if you use those terms, and I'm glad we keep coming back to them, because again, I've stolen that from the Wicked. It's a great way to think about life. You can be too humble to the point that you become passive. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can overshoot that and you can become arrogant. And so I think one of the things that you have to recognize in all attributes, and there's more than just those three, but all these great attributes about what makes a good person is they're all balanced out, and you sort of have to manage that balance at different times. And if you can recognize that threading that needle you described is going to change all the time, and it changes with every person, every day, in every situation. It's a constantly evolving thing. There's nothing static about that. You'll recognize that your meter of humility actually has to kind of move around a little bit. There's times you have to kind of let that ego come out and go, hang on, that thing that everybody else says can't be done, I'm going to do that. And that's kind of like pushing towards arrogant, not over the edge. Because if you're like, oh my gosh, that does look so hard, and oh, I could never do that. And that humility becomes passive, then you're not going to be able to do those things that people say can't be done. And so even that needle of humility has to bounce around and move around based on what's going on. And that I think is true for all attributes. And I think the hardest thing about it is having the level of awareness of where does that needle need to be right now? How do I thread that? Well, it changes all the time. And I think that example of humility, of the way Dave Berke wins, is he looks and I go, oh, you don't think I can do that? Watch this. Mm-hmm. But if I overshoot that, and I'm super arrogant and loud and obnoxious, that actually doesn't help me. And if I undershoot and go, yeah, that's impossible, nobody could ever do that, then I don't succeed either. So that balance is hard, and it's sort of an ongoing thing that changes throughout life. It's dynamic, and it's a real challenge. It's a real leadership challenge. But that's what I think about is, hey, where does that needle need to be today with this person in this situation to help me navigate all those challenges of all those attributes?
Nice, man. A few more questions here. All right, so this is from Tom John. He says, if you were to play DCS, Digital Combat Simulator, what jet would you choose?
Man, that's not fair. I don't know. People ask me the question is, what's my favorite jet to fly? And I gotta have to have 4 different answers. The Hornet is my first love. I imagine you think of the Strike Eagle the same way, and that plane holds a place in my heart, and I will love that airplane forever. Something that I know is true, and people ask me, the F-16, the Viper, has the best view in fighter aviation. There's not a plane in the world that when you're sitting in the cockpit isn't better than that. The Raptor is the coolest plane I've ever flown, and if I was going to go to war, I'd take an F-35, and I wouldn't even bat an eyelash. It's the most capable machine. So it depends on what I'm really going to do. But it's such a cool question. I know how arrogant it probably sounds, like, well, let me think of these 4 airplanes and figure out which one's best. They all were special and unique in their own ways. They all had attributes that were really undeniably unique to those platforms that sometimes the other planes didn't have. And they were all really, really special. And my memory of those 4 is so fond that it's really hard to pick one. So it really depends on what I'm going to do. I will tell you this, if I'm going to war, I'm going to an F-35, and I'm not even thinking about it. I know my Raptor brethren don't like to hear that, but the F-35 as a machine, as a warfighting machine, it is a league of its own. It does things it's not even close. I want to go zip around that F-16. I want to see the world. You know better than anyone. The view is the best view in the world. That thing, and what a beast, man, that block fit, what a beast of a machine. So it's really hard to pick one.
Got it. So Tom John, he dodged the question, just for the record. No, I'm just
Raptor, find the Raptor DCS, period. Short answer.
All right.
Other stuff.
All right. Raptor it is. All right, man. Cool. All right. Winding down here to the end, Dave, I'm curious, just what's your definition of a life well lived?
Oh man. That's a great question. I think if the people you care most about live the life that they want to live, you are going to have a level of supreme satisfaction that's going to be really hard to beat. The early part of my life was all about thinking about what I wanted. It was all about what I wanted. It never occurred to me in my teens and my 20s that my career in fighter aviation would lead me to have like this amazing experience outside of the military with my family and my kids and my friends and things like this, like you and I getting to meet each other and having these conversations. I always just pictured me in the cockpit of an airplane. So I don't discourage anyone from thinking sort of singularly about their life early on, but what I'll offer is that a life well lived is one that continues to expand and broaden throughout your life to a point where you recognize the greatest happiness, the greatest success that you achieve is when you see the other people that matter to you live a good life. And yes, it's easy to say that looking back at my career, but a life well lived is one that expands forever. The minute you get static, the minute you get narrow, the minute you get flat, the minute you stop growing, and the minute you stop influencing the people around you, I think you're going to have a struggle believing that you lived a full life well lived. So as long as you're breathing, keep expanding and keep growing and keep looking for ways to make the people around you live a better life, and you are going to be supremely satisfied in the end.
Man, that's awesome. Okay, this might be the most important question yet.
Raptor. The answer is still the Raptor.
Let's see here. Is having great hair a prerequisite for being an awesome fighter pilot?
Totally. Of course.
Okay. As long as we have that clear to everyone. Dude, this has been awesome, man. Like so much fun. I couldn't have imagined it being this fun, this personable, and I just want to acknowledge you as legit being humble, credible, and approachable. You know, as much as I can tell through Zoom, hopefully we can meet in person one day, do this over some beverages or something. But anything that you want to share with everybody watching from the BJet Clean channel, I'll throw this obviously up on my YouTube. So we'll do like a small chunk on my main BJet Clean channel, and we'll throw the full podcast on my personal vlog channel. But yeah, anything else that you want to toss out there?
No, I think we'd all look back and say, Dave talked enough on this one. But I will say this, and I appreciate that. And I would sort of echo that back to you for anybody out there listening. I mean, Ryan, you kind of just like DM'd me and I'm like, sounds cool. It was super easy to do this. You're as down to earth as anybody. There was not some big production to get this thing done. And we just picked a time and jumped in a Zoom call. And I think that speaks volumes to you as well. So I appreciate your comments, but right back to you is, we just got on this call. We've never met. I mean, we had a couple of messages from a third party saying you two should connect. And it was like, I think there's something about that, that, you know, fraternity or that brotherhood that we share with some common experiences and some common places and some common life goals that create that really cool bond. Certainly the bond of service in the military, and then the bond of outside the military, trying to expand, you know, your horizons to helping people outside of there. Creates a pretty cool connection, man. This has been like super easy, super fun. And thanks for what you're doing. And thanks for including me in this, man. This has been cool.
Absolutely, man. It's a pleasure. And so best place to find you for the folks watching is Instagram.
Yeah, I guess I'm probably most active on Instagram. I have to accept that I have to do some social media. It's David R. Berke, where it usually gets screwed up as my last name is Berke. Okay. If not, just go to you. And I think I'm tagged somewhere on your page somewhere. And then listen, if you really want to get a hold of me, go to Echelon Front, Echelon Front's website, which is echelonfront.com. You know, obviously I super beneficial to spend all the time with Leif, Jocko, and the team. I'm on Jocko's podcast a lot. So it's been really, really cool to be a part of that. So if you want to connect with me or hear from me, I'm out there somewhere. It shouldn't be too hard to find.
Right on, man. And then the last thing is I was digging around a little bit when I was checking you out in Echelon Front, and there's like a leadership academy, right? Where you can do like an online leadership academy. Can you give us 30 seconds on that, what that's about?
It's literally the Extreme Ownership Academy. Same thing. Go to echelonfront.com. I believe like top page will be like, join the academy, something along those lines. Basically what we've realized is we're a relatively small company. There's not a ton of us. And we have this massive obligation that we feel like we have to reach as many people as we can, because the principles that we teach are so helpful to people's lives that the only way we can scale this is through this online resource, which we call the Academy, where we have a whole bunch of recorded stuff. All the content that we teach is recorded. But the coolest part about it is once a week, Jocko, Leif, me, and the rest of the team do live sessions just like this. And people like join the Academy, they log in, and we literally talk. We talk about a topic and we do live Q&A. So it was our way of being able to reach hundreds and thousands of people in real time without having to travel all over the country, which is not a very scalable way to do it. So it's been a really cool thing. It's a cool resource. And if you literally want to talk to Jocko live, just like you and I are doing right now, and ask him a question, that's the place to do it. So get on there if you can. It'd be cool to see anybody out there, and you can ask us questions in real time and interact with us. And it's a good time.
Sweet, man. I'm going to check it out. I hope some of my followers will check it out as well. But dude, this has been so much fun, Dave. I'm going to let you go. Thanks again, brother. Wish you all the best. I know you're just going to keep doing cool things. I'm excited to follow, man. So thanks again.
Appreciate it, man. Be in touch.
Will do. Later.
See ya.
There you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. I know I got a ton out of it. Let me know in the comments what you got out of it. And you can hit me up on Instagram and tell me other people or other subjects that you would like me to cover or interview. I would love to hear from you. But before we get going, if you enjoyed this conversation, why not just dominate that like button? Maybe subscribe, because every time you do that, a pilot somewhere gets their wings or something like that. I'm glad you guys are here. Thanks so much for watching. Most of all, have a great day.